Three, two, one.
Hello and welcome to tonight's special AFL Draft coverage thanks to Rookie Me Central. I'm your co-host Peter Williams, and with me tonight
I'm Grace McRae.
So what we're going to run through in tonight's countdown to the big night is we're going to go through the Rookie Me Central Phantom Draft. So we'll run through the full 20 that we put up this morning, and then we're going to look at some of the analysis that could potentially happen tonight. And of course, into tomorrow night. We've got live trading, we've got potential bids. We've got a lot on tonight. But to help us will be three experts in the AFL draft room, led by AFL Draft Editor Michael Alvaro. Michael, how are you?
Thanks for the kind words, Pete. Very happy to be here, and it's Christmas for us, or if you're me, it's like your birthday. Very very keen to get it underway, and glad to be with Declan and Ed here.
All right, so starting tonight, we're going to go through our Phantom Draft that we put up today, which had the top 20. We're going to run through some of the names bit by bit, and then we're going to get the thoughts of the experts as to just perhaps why they're going there and what they might offer their clubs. So to start with, we're going to go through the first six because we're pretty aware that that's going to happen the way they are. They're the most confident based on what we've heard. So with pick 1, North Melbourne, Jason Horne-Francis, there's no surprises there in terms of who the Roos are going to pick. Then with pick 2, the Giants are going to actually make a bid on Sam Darcy, and then the Bulldogs will, of course, match that. We're fully expecting that. Then they'll have to pick again, of course, and they'll go with Sandringham Dragons midfielder Finn Callaghan. With pick 4, the Gold Coast Suns are going to go bid on Collingwood father-son Nick Dacos, who gets through to there, which would be a great result for the Pies. And, of course, Collingwood will match that very, very quickly. Followed by Gold Coast's then selection they'll get in terms of Mac Andrew, which, of course, he's aligned to another club in Melbourne, but he won't get there because of being picked inside the top 20. So Mac Andrew will head to the Suns. And then with pick 6, Adelaide are going to pick up exciting forward Josh Rochelle from the Murray Bushrangers. So, guys, what do you sort of think about those 6 and how do you sort of feel that they'll fit into their clubs?
Yeah, I think we like them. We're pretty consensus on them, as would most other people be around the country. So, Ed, I'll start with you, Jason Horne-Francis then. How's he going to fit into the Roos? Do you think he sort of suits a need, or is he just the best?
He is the best. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, he's been a player that's been on the radar for quite a few years now, making his senior debut last year as well. And it's just, kept going and going and just been an absolute star. I mean, his game in that final series where he kicked 3 goals, he could have kicked even more as well. I mean, he's just showing some real star-like qualities. And, I mean, it really was a no-brainer for North Melbourne to go with him.
Yeah, and then you've got, obviously, Darcy, the bid with your boys, GWS, Declan. So, are you a little surprised that they're not going back-to-back there with Dacos as well? Because it's a pretty good get for the Pies to have him slide a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That is good for Collingwood. And I think it probably just relates back to draft strategy. I think Caruso was pretty open and honest when he was on the Road to the Draft podcast earlier this year, where he said, we don't bid for the sake of it. We bid for sort of players that are going to fill a need and that we would want if they were sort of in the open pool.
Yeah, so you say fill a need. Finn Callaghan's also a midfielder, but the Giants probably do need a tall, but we think they're going to take Callaghan. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Finn's really just proven himself to be the best available at this pick throughout the year. We've probably heard a few different names linked to it heavily. Mac Andrew a couple of weeks ago probably would have been the one that you put your money on, but I think it's pretty simple at that point in the draft. You go for the player that you sort of back to be the best, and that's probably Finn if you look at everything.
Yeah, and then we've got Nick Dacos, obviously. He was incredible. We saw him first game of the NAB League season, his debut. Won the first centre bounce, and he's going to be an absolute steal, I guess, at 4, which is still ridiculously high. But, he could be one of the best 2 players.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he's been a player that every single game pretty much he's getting, that 30-plus disposals. He's hitting the scoreboard. He's commanding attention from the opposition as well. He's going to slot into an AFL round 1. So Pies fans, they'll be ecstatic to see him. I mean, he could fit anywhere from half-back to, wing or half-forward. I'd like to see him half-forward and really causing a lot of havoc because he does definitely have a nose for goal.
Yeah, and Big Mac at number 5 there to Gold Coast. Maybe a little bit of a surprise. Josh Gibcus was one in the mix there. Callaghan, if he slotted through. What do you make of that? What do you think he brings to the Suns list?
Yeah, so the Suns, they've got a really good midfield at the moment. I mean, they've got Rao, they've got Anderson. So having someone who can hit the ball down to him long term in Mac Andrew, I mean, he may not even have to hit it down. He'll just grab it out of the ruck, run away and kick it in, and that's something he really provides. He could be anything, really. I mean, he's still fairly light frame in, that 74 kilo range, so he's going to take a bit of time, but I mean, he's probably got the highest upside out of any player in this draft pool. So a very exciting one for Gold Coast fans to look out for in the coming years.
I think the last one we had there was Josh O'Shalley, one of your favourites, Declan, obviously. We love what he brings. So what can you tell us about him and why is he the one that Adelaide's going to go for?
Well, he's just an X-factor player, and, that's probably something that Adelaide lack on their list currently, whether that's going to be through the midfield or as a small forward in the long run. That's the exciting thing about Josh, is he can play sort of either position, but we've seen him live, we've seen what he can do, marks well above his head, he's got a good leap for his height, sort of like a dynamic Jamie Elliott sort, so it'll be interesting to see what he could bring to the Crows.
Yep. So that's the first 6. Pete, do you have a few more for us?
Yeah, so I think our next prospects that we are looking at is we have pick number 7, Hawthorn, Josh Ward, who is from Northern Knights. He's a midfielder. Pick 8, we have Fremantle, Ben Hobbs. He plays for the GWV Rebels. He's an inside midfielder. Pick 9, we have Richmond, Josh Gibcus, and he's from also the Rebels, another key defender. Pick 10, we have Fremantle, Jai Amos. He's from East Perth. He also plays for Western Australia, and he's a key forward. What's your thoughts on them?
Yeah, we like him again. Pete's voice probably sounded a bit different there than I expected, but pick 7, what did you make of that? Who we got in there, Declan?
Yes, that would be Josh Ward to Hawthorn. Yeah, so Josh is obviously a fantastic player, and he probably started the year not slow, but maybe not the main attraction at Northern, and then when his teammate Ned Long got injured, he sort of really stepped up into that inside midfield role and showed that he can do it on the inside just as well as he did on the outside. I think just kept on building from there, consistently improved each week, and shown him that he's probably going to be one of the more reliable midfielders and one of the safer bets in the draft.
Yeah, reliable is a good word for him. Also a Hawks fan, which they'll love. A little bit like Sam Mitchell himself. So some good connections there. This is where it gets interesting though, Ed. Fremantle come into it, pick 8. I know we're expecting a few different things to happen, but we've gone with Ben Hobbs, the inside midfielder. Maybe not what they need, but you think he's too hard to pass up?
Yeah, he's a very tough one to pass up. I mean, in terms of, your contested ball winner, he is probably the best in the draft as that pure contested player who, I think in one under-16s game I watched in the trials, he was pushing over his own teammates just to win the ball. So, I mean, he's ruthless there, but this year he's really improved his outside game. His running capacity on the outside, winning a lot more uncontested ball, which is going to round him out a lot better as a player. And I mean, he could join the likes of Caleb Sarong, another Vic Country boy up there at Fremantle, and he is probably one of the biggest guarantees of being a good 10-year AFL level midfielder.
And Josh Gibcus then was the next one, I believe, off the board. Pick 9, a defender, another Rebels boy. Pretty hard choice, you think, between him and the next boy that we've got on the list?
Yeah, it is, and Richmond are probably in a weird spot where they're really safe for I think the next couple of years in key position stocks, but after that they do probably need to start looking towards the future. And it's certainly a hard choice between Amos and Gibcus, but I think Gibcus' athleticism really helps him not only lock down but also intercept and rebound pretty well. And we've seen, maybe not to a great degree of exposure, but he has played forward before, and we've seen that, and he's looked okay there. So he's got that flexibility if Richmond really want to push it.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of forward, Jai Amos was the next one, and probably one in contention for pick 8 as well with Fremantle. So they're going to get that midfielder and then the key forward, we're thinking. Another one who's pretty hard to pass up.
Yeah, especially when you look at Fremantle's list, under the age of 22, they've only got 2 players over 190 centimetres and one they've only just drafted. So that is definitely a key area they've got to look for. And when you've got 2 top 10 picks, you've got a little bit to go with needs also on talent. And I mean, Jai Amos to kick more goals than anyone this year. I mean, if you're going to pick a key forward, he's probably number 1 on your list. He's very dynamic at ground level, pretty good overhead. He's very raw as well. Like he lives quite a fair away from East Perth, so he has to do a bit of travelling, and he could be one that really improves again at the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's our top 10 one and done.
Absolutely. So that's who we've got down as the top 10. It's going to be quite interesting to see whether that pans out. But from this point on, it gets even more interesting. Now, we do believe with pick 11 that St Kilda are going to be looking at Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, obviously Glenelg boy, played some senior footy through there, and probably the most silky and most, I guess, most damaging kick in the draft, if you like that kind of thing. Obviously still light, but he's someone who can have a real impact at the Saints, and we think there'll probably be a few people that'll be interested in this pick 11. If we go to pick 12, we've got Neil Erasmus remaining at home with West Coast. We think that the Eagles will fit in pretty well with him. And then pick 13, this is a pick Essendon have that, you know, quite a lot of clubs might be inquiring about, like a Brisbane or perhaps like a Geelong or Richmond, someone, Sydney maybe, because it gets to really get into the preferences from this point. So we've got Matthew Johnson at this stage out of Subiaco. Now, he's obviously the WA boy who could go to the Eagles potentially, but we've got him going to Essendon at pick 13. And then at pick 14, we've got Josh Sin going to Port, so that'll be an interesting choice there if he ends up heading over. We know we spoke to him the other day, and you'll be able to catch that soon via our YouTube channel. But other than Sin, we move into pick 15 and Blake Howes, which will be a very interesting choice if the GWS Giants go there, because it'll mean that they'll pair up with Finn Callaghan, who they took up at pick 3. So, guys, what do you make of those selections?
Yeah, well, starting from the top, Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, I think we're all pretty big fans of him, and as Pete said there, ultimately one of the classiest ball users of the crop. Do you think he sort of suits what the Saints need there, a bit of class?
Yeah, I reckon so. I mean, I think they've got plenty of really good inside midfielders. I mean, they could afford to lose Dunstan, who did pretty well in the Brownlow medal with a few votes, but I mean, they have a few players like that, but they don't have that many lot of class on the outside. And I mean, you don't get much class here than Wanganeen-Malira, whose ball use is exceptional. His decision-making and poise with ball in hand is also really good. But he also runs both ways, so he's not just a one-way runner running forward as a wingman. He'll even get back and use his athleticism. He's got a good spring to him. He's very raw, but he's certainly one who long-term could be a really, really special player.
Yeah, and same goes, I guess, with the next selection there, Neil Erasmus. We're getting into the local boys for the West Australian clubs after Jai Amos as well. Why do you think the Eagles go for him, and who else is probably in the range there?
Yeah, well, you know, Neil's sort of one of those really rare talents that's a tall midfielder and is as good at ground level as he is in the air, arguably. So he's got that capability to play through the midfield, which he has done this year, mainly through the PSA competition with Hale. And we've seen him really dominate as a forward with Subiaco last year in the Colts Grand Final, where he kicked, I think it was 4 goals. So, yeah, not bad he was only 16 then as well, being that December birth date. So, plenty of room for development there. You know, for other options, you'd think that Matthew Johnson, another local boy and also from Subiaco, would be under consideration, and maybe Josh Goder and Campbell Chesser has been one that's been linked recently.
Correct. Campbell Chesser, of course, we've had a good chat with him yesterday. But over to Essendon and Ed, an Essendon supporter. Speaking of that man, Matthew Johnson there, if he's not picked up by the local clubs, then you think that he adds a bit of a point of difference to the Bombers?
Yeah, so it's been well documented. I mean, Essendon have got a lot of good midfielders, but a lot of them are at the smaller range. I mean, Darcy Parish, Andy McGrath, and of course Zach Merritt. They're all, you know, that 180 centimetre mark around there. But there's not much height. I mean, Stringer goes through there, but you also love him up forward. But Matty Johnson, I mean, he's a genuine 192 centimetre midfielder. I mean, he doesn't quite use his height to his advantage. He's more of a skillful, like a Pendlebury type of player who can pick the right options. He's very, very skillful by hand and by foot, and he's still rather light as well. So he's still got a bit to add to his frame. So there's a lot of promise there with Johnson. I mean, I wouldn't, if he doesn't go to Bombers, he won't last very long after that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought so. I remember watching him as an under-16. He's about 186 centimetres and 65 kilos. So, he's filling out slowly, but still a little bit light. The next fella we've got with Port Adelaide's pick, Josh Sin. Obviously, quite a good talent. Was probably rated around the top 5 coming into the year. Has slid a bit, but probably backing him in to be a very good player.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's one of many that have slid that we'll talk about later on, I'm sure. But you know, Sin specifically with his just explosive speed, really helps him rebound from the half back line. And we also saw it through the midfield this year in the few games that he did get to play, and he looked impressive through there. He didn't look like he was going to be an outside player exclusively either, which is something that might have been a concern for people with a player transitioning into the midfield. And you know, we hear about his kicking, you know, a few issues this year, but the execution was still, or the technique rather, was still there.
Yep, absolutely. And obviously, probably consider him at the Bombers as well, you'd assume. But the next pick to round out this selection was Blake House, GWS. Probably going to be packaged with his good mate, his schoolmate. They've been best friends since I think they were about 10 years old. Finn Callaghan. So what does Blake House add to the Giants list?
Yeah, so, I mean, you touch on that. I mean, it's a really good tactic if you're going to bring in a player in the top 5 and, you know, you got the go-home factor there. If you can get his best mate, it goes a long way. But, yeah, Blake House is a bit different to Callaghan. He plays a bit more on the wings and half-forward line. He's a very good overhead, very athletic. He even showed he has good endurance as well. I mean, all of those are tick, tick, tick for a lot of recruiters and a lot of upside as well. So, I mean, he's one who just moves really well. I mean, you have to just see it live where he's about a 190 centimetre player, but he moves like he's 180 centimetres. So, yeah, there's a lot of promise and a lot of upside with Blake House, and he'd be a very good selection there.
Yeah, so I think we do have a very happy Giants fan to my right as well, Grace and Peter.
Prospects are all Victorians. The first 3 are all Vic Metro and the last 2 are Vic Country, which is very exciting. Pick number 16, Brisbane have prospect Darcy Wilmot. Darcy is from Northern Knights and is a medium defender. Pick 17, we have Richmond, Tyler Swansea. He's from Eastern Rangers and is a balanced midfielder. Pick 18, Sydney have got Josh Gota, Calder Cannons boy, with medium agility and midfielder. Pick 19 is Melbourne, Tom Brown. Tom is from the Bushrangers, medium defender, which is very, very exciting. Pick 20, we have Brisbane, Campbell Chesser. He's from Sandringham Dragons and is a medium defender and an outside midfielder, which is very, very good to look at.
Yeah, what do you think about that top 20, guys?
Thanks, Pete and Grace. It's a good top 20. Pretty talented bunch at the top end. We've got a lot of Victorians in there, despite not playing much footy. Starting off with Wilmot there to the Lions. One who you can certainly hear when he's on the field, but he's pretty flashy in his game as well.
Yeah, you certainly can hear him, can't you? One of the best leaders in the crop, I think it's fair to say, despite being the youngest player in the crop as well, and New Year's Eve birth. So he'll be waiting a while before he's 18 to truly celebrate draft day. But a really reliable defender, and I think we spoke about Josh Ward, his Northern Knights teammate, being, you know, almost a sure bet at AFL level. I think Wilmot is going to be that sort of player as well. How you know, he's just got that work rate and the drive, and you see it in how he plays and how he prioritises his defending over all else. And you know, I think that'll hold him in good stead at the next level.
That's probably something Brisbane have been looking for, that driving halfback. Josh Sin in the range as well. Campbell Chesser, another who we're going to touch on a bit later, actually. But the next pick, Tyler Swansea to the Tigers, Ed. I know you rate him pretty highly, and he might be one that Sydney is also hoping slips through. But yeah, we've got him at the Tigers.
Yeah, I mean, he's a Richmond supporter as well, so we'd really like to go to Richmond. And funny enough, he's compared to Trent Cotchin as a midfielder as well. So, yeah, he's a class act. I mean, he doesn't fumble. He's very clean at stoppages. You couldn't tell what foot he kicks. I mean, he's kicked just as many goals on his left foot than his right foot. Yeah. But, yeah, he's one who is a top 10 talent on his talent alone. He hasn't quite been able to get that consistency this year. I mean, his first game this year against Calder was exceptional, 34 touches and 2 goals, and also a really good game for Box Hill in his VFL debut with 24 disposals and 2 goals. So when he gets it right, he's a very damaging player, but he's had a few games where he's maybe had about the 20 disposals and hasn't quite been able to get on it. But, I mean, he could long-term be a really real big steal for Richmond at that point.
And speaking of Josh Gota, who could be anything in this draft, really, probably had a little bit of interest earlier on, maybe around, you know, the Bombers, Port Adelaide even, but we've got him at the Swans, Declan. So what's he going to add to that group, and do you think that they are looking for that high upside player?
Yeah, and what a steal it would be considering how highly a few people have had him. I know Ed has him really high in particular, and you know, he's just a super athletic beast with He's played pretty much every position on field within the last few years to a pretty good level. So having that versatility and that, I guess, clean canvas for the Swans to turn him into the player that they really want is going to be exciting. Through the midfield, I think is where he's most exciting. He uses his acceleration well and wins it in close, which is, hard to find for a bigger player like himself.
Absolutely. We do have Tom Brown at pick 19 going to Melbourne. So pretty exciting halfback, can probably play multiple positions. Didn't quite see it as much this year. But what do you think he injects into the Premier's side there?
I mean, he injects like a lot of good qualities, not just in terms of his football ability. I mean, by all reports, he's a really good kid. He's a hard worker. He's obviously got the family ties as well. I mean, he could have been a father-son for Geelong, very close, but not quite. But he's very athletic. I mean, he runs really quick as well. He's got the good endurance base, good leap, and all of those. I mean, for a halfback, I mean, they're perfect. But he can play other positions. I mean, he played forward mostly in his under-16s year. He can play on a wing. But I liken him to more of a Tom Stewart type of defender, that medium-range type who can intercept really well, but also offer some good rebound.
And we talk of steals. I think rounding out our 20 is one of those. And that's Campbell Chesser. Probably didn't find his best form this year and was injured. It's just that sort of matter of consistency. But we know, having watched him for a few years, that he's going to be a very, very good player.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like Sin and Swansea, he was one that was touted as arguably a top 5 pick at the start of the year. And, these things happen. But I think he's shown even in his few appearances where he was fully healthy that he's got a really good scope to be that dynamic midfielder that can, win it in close, but, also knows how to hold his space on the outside and really damage with his disposal. And, we know about his athletics background. He's a really good sprinter, so that speed off the half-back line, wing, or through the midfield is going to be valuable no matter how you use it.
Yep, so that's Brisbane pick 20, Campbell Chesser, rounding out the first round, 20 picks. Hope you enjoyed, Grace and Pete.
Yeah, absolutely. So quite a fascinating first round that we've got planned for tonight, but they're not the only ones. We've got a few others that are potentially able to crack into that first round, starting with Jacob Van Ruin out of Claremont in WA. Obviously, the key position player, can play at either end. He's someone who could sneak in there. And then there's a couple of sort of forwards who can push up into the midfield, particularly GWV Rebels Sam Butler, who impressed up there, but also Jesse Motlop out of WA. Now, of course, that leads on to the next point, because there's quite a few players that are aligned to clubs. So I guess the question is, Motlop in particular, because he's got a special kind of reasoning reason why he won't end up at Fremantle based on his region where he might get picked. But not just him, but some of the other players, such as Josh Faye, Jace Burgoyne, and some of the other father-sons that are coming through, as well as some of the later ones. So, guys, if you sort of run through perhaps some of the academy bids and who might be those that might pop up, whether they're next generation, Northern Academy, or, of course, the father-sons. We've already had a couple, but who else is it that might pop up and come into consideration?
Quite comprehensive from you there, Pete. There's a lot to unpack, but I think touching on those bids, Jesse Motlop might be the first that sort of goes through the 20s, Josh Faye as well. I'll probably go to you first, Declan, with Faye. Obviously a Giants boy. Seen a little bit of him, but a pretty small sample size, even with so many players not playing much. But what does he present?
Yeah, well, from what we have seen of him, and he's had a couple of really good performances, none more so than the academy game against the Geelong VFL, where, he really showed us his dare and dash out of defence, and that long left boot that just penetrates so easily it's hard to miss, and it's understandable why he's getting interest in the 20s from other clubs as well, with the damage that he can do off the half-back line.
Yeah, and where do you think the bid comes? I know Carlton's a side that sort of tends to do so. Richmond's got 3 picks in the 20s. Is that the sort of range you're seeing him in?
I think absolutely. I think, on the slim chance it does come inside the top 20, it'll probably be Richmond, but if not, I think he probably gets through that late 20s.
Yeah, and then Motlop, the other boy we touched on there, obviously tied to Fremantle, wasn't quite a father-son with Port or North Melbourne. Won't get to Fremantle, we don't think, unless they select him themselves early, or with the first pick of the second round. But where do you see him fitting in?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot of clubs that have picks in those 20s range that really do need a quality small forward, and he's one who's got to play some senior football, and he got to play in the grand final, so that goes to show how much he's rated at the moment. I mean, he's got quite a bit of craft. He's a very smart small forward. He's not super, super quick, but he's just got a natural footballing ability and confidence. I mean, he could probably be sitting in one of our chairs and been able to do this. I mean, he runs his own podcast. He's got his head tightly screwed on, and he'll be a very quality player for anyone in that top 30, and I'm very sure he'll go in that range.
In terms of other bids, probably 2 St Kilda boys, Declan, Mitch Owens, who was a chance at being that first rounder, and then Marcus Winhager, 2 NGAs. Of course, they got 4 nominated with Paris and Josiah Kyle as well, but we're thinking that Winhager and Owens will be the 2 to go in the national.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously Mitch Owens is another one you can catch on Rookie Me Central, a YouTube
Great plug,
interview.
mate, yep.
Yeah, fantastic. And he's sort of a tall utility, not tall in the sense of key position height, but 190 centimetres. I mean, pretty tall. He's good at ground level. He's really hard at it as well. So a contested player, but again, knows how to hold his space out on the wing, and has some really good athleticism. And while he didn't get the most exposure that you'd hope over the year, I think he's shown enough to show that he should sort of get bid on around the 20s.
Yeah, and Winhager, obviously that explosive type, bit of a mid forward. Where do you see their ranges falling?
Yeah, well, Winhager mid forward, as you said, and that explosive but smaller athlete. Unfortunately, copped a couple of injuries over the last few years, so we never like to see that. He's probably more 30s to 45, you'd think, purely because of that injury setting him back a bit.
Yeah, and the rest, Ed, who else are we expecting to go in the national draft? Obviously, Tajwa Woden's one. Jace Burgoyne's pretty highly touted. Eric Benning might even get a bid. So who are you sort of seeing getting picked and where?
Yeah, so starting with the NGA and Eric Benning, I mean, he's another one that Fremantle would be pretty keen to add. Like we touched on before, Fremantle have not got a lot of height in their younger players, and he can play as a key forward who can pinch it in the ruck. He's got a lot of upside about him. He may still only get a later bid or not bid at all, but he's definitely showed some promise. And in terms of the father-son picks, I mean, Jace Burgoyne, I mean, he's a very classy player. He moves really well. He can play on the wing. I mean, he's an absolute ball magnet as well. He's one of the top possession winners at his local level. And he's even got to play a few reserves games as well. So he'll be one who probably gets a bid somewhere between that 40 to 60 range if I was to guess. And again, Tajwa Woden's one who's really impressed as the year's gone on. Obviously, he's tied to Melbourne. He can play on a wing. He can play half back, half forward. So he's got that versatility there. So he's another one who'll probably get in that 40 to 60 range. But Melbourne supporters would be pretty happy to add him to their list.
A lot of North supporters would be pretty keen to hear about Jackson Archer as well, a father-son. Do have a few knocking around, but you think he'll slide through?
Yeah, I think, obviously as a father-son nominated, they've got to take him with their last pick in the draft. If he lasts that long, they'll be hoping for that. And he's an archer, isn't he, Michael? He's a really good lockdown defender and doesn't give his opponent an inch, and he's, sort of not afraid of any task, regardless of how much bigger opponents might be either.
And just tracking back a little bit on Benning, Ed, do you think that given we're thinking they're going to target a guy like Amos with one of their first picks, maybe even Jacob Van Rooyen, if he gets through to the second round, does having, I guess, the comfort of bringing in Benning later on change what they do with those picks?
I wouldn't think so personally. I think that there's quite a lot of young depth that they need. I mean, you compare it to a lot of other clubs. There are some clubs that have at least 6 or 7 players under 22 that are key position and developing, and you need it for your list balance. And if you can get, especially when they're local as well, if you can just get them in the door, there you have them. You can commit to them for a long-term assault. And I would definitely still take Benning or Van Rooyen and Amos. I mean, I'm sure a lot of Fremantle supporters would agree as well.
Yeah, Ed, not too much of a good thing at all, Grace and Pete.
Thank you guys for that. Do you think we have any potential bolters or any potential sliders?
Yeah, I'll leave this to one of you two, bolters and sliders. Who wants to take each?
All right, I guess I'll take the sliders, and obviously the ones where we've touched on before, the likes of Josh Sin, Tyler Sonsi and Campbell Chesser. I mean, at the start of the year, they were looking like definitive top 10 prospects, even with their early games this year as well, not just from their hype from under 16s level. I mean, to get some of those players in the mid-late first round, or in some cases even the second round, I mean, those are some absolute steals there. And I mean, Ben Hobbs is another. I mean, if he doesn't get taken by Fremantle, how far will he slide? And I mean, I think he's definitely a top 5 talent kind of midfielder. And if he goes a bit further than that, that's a real steal.
And then, like, further on in the draft as well, you know, talk about guys like Matt Roberts, Jack Williams, who might slide a little bit. Any other names you feel will go down the order, you know, in a surprise?
It's kind of hard to say at the moment because of how close, I mean, this year's draft are. It's kind of hard to say who should really be the sliders. I mean, in terms of other potential players that I have in my own top 20, I mean, Josh Goder is one that's gone down a little bit lower in some rankings. And in terms of players that could be a little bit later, maybe even a Zach Taylor. I mean, there might be some clubs who feel that they've already got enough, you know, that 180 centimetre mark midfielder and feel that they don't need to go for that type. They may go early on a tall, and we talk about bolters, maybe an Anthony Caminiti or a player of that ilk that is in a position where clubs will just take them early just because they really need to fill that role.
Yeah, always standing on your toes a little bit there, Declan. You already got an Anthony Caminiti out of the way for the Bolters, but who else do you see sort of rising up the order, whether that be first round or onwards?
Well, I think Mitch Nevitt is probably the big one to consider here. You know, we know he's got first round interest, and you know, as that tall inside midfielder with really good endurance and athleticism, it's no surprise that he's sort of drawing that interest good above his head as well. So I guess not too dissimilar to, you know, other highly rated players in Josh Goder and Neil Erasmus. You know, Sam Butler as well, might not have been spoken about as a top 20 talent so far this year, but he's one that's well and truly in contention to land there on draft night, or tonight rather. And also Blake House, you know, you could consider him a bit of a bolter as well. He's sort of been one that hasn't been hovering around the 15 mark, but now we're hearing that he might, you know, go as high as Essendon or GWS. So you never know.
Yeah, I'll chuck in a Brady Hoff. If we're talking overall year, I feel like he's one who's really risen in stocks. So you would have seen a little bit of him this year, Declan. So what do you think makes him so good and a potential bolter?
Yeah, a little bit of WA football for myself, Michael. You know, his versatility is probably his biggest, you know, I guess appeal at the moment. He has played half back, half forward, on the wing. You know, he can play as a forward target as well, as his athleticism allows him to do. Obviously, he got his Peel Thunder debut and did quite well. I think he got the most disposals of any of the WA boys to play seniors. So, you know, he's got that sort of, again, not necessarily exposure, but he's got that little bit of form that would give clubs a bit of confidence that he can translate into the AFL pretty easily.
Yeah, and another WA player, Angus Sheldrick's probably one that no one would have had on their radar at the start of the year, as someone who's just gotten better and better. He's definitely one of the better performers during the final series for Claremont, and especially in the South Australia versus West Australia games as well. I mean, he was just an absolute hard as a cat's head, just keeps going. I mean, he's already a physically built type of player, so he's fairly ready-made in that regard. But in terms of players that can win their own ball and he even added goal kicking to his repertoire later in the year as well. So he's one that's kind of catapulted into top 30 rankings where no one really would have heard of his name during the first few rounds of this year.
Top 30, yes or no?
I think he's a good chance.
Cool.
We're going to have to cut that, yeah. All right. Thanks for that, guys. So what we're going to move on to now is potentially coming up with a few live trades. We know there's a few in play with Essendon, potentially Brisbane, Geelong. Who do you guys think that is going to most likely come up with some live trade options within that first round, or perhaps the first pick of the second round?
Yeah, I think one that is very obvious and that will happen early on is obviously that Western Bulldogs pick 23 would be snapped up anyway with the Darcy bid at number 2. So, Ed, do you think they're going to have to get pretty busy pretty early?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if Geelong really do want that pick 23, I mean, there are a lot of players there for them to target if they do slide down, like a Nevitt or a Brown. I mean, they'd love to add Brown for the romance of it all, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of positional needs for Geelong at the moment. I mean, they just lost Constable, so maybe the midfield is something they're not going to look for. But, I mean, if someone like Nevitt's around and he's a local Geelong Falcons boy, that they would go with him. But they may even use those picks 22 and 23 to trade up into the first round. If there's a player that they feel is a top 10 talent that slides to, say, 16 or 17, I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, they're already a list that plays finals footies regularly. They just want to get the best talent through the door, and that might be the way to do it.
And does that mean, Declan, obviously with Collingwood and the Western Bulldogs having those bids, that they have the flex to bid or trade rather back into this year's draft?
Yeah, well, Derek Hine was on the show that Callum Twomey does today.
Yep.
And he did say that there was a bit of an appetite for them to trade back in, and once they matched that bid for Dacos. So, could that be an indication they might already have something planned? You don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. They were pretty active traders last year, so there's no reason to think they won't be again this year.
And any others, Ed, that you think will get busy on draft night, maybe get into that first round or move up into that second, third round?
I think Carlton, especially since they have lost Liam Jones, they may need to be a bit creative in what they add to their list. Whether that's an extra pick later in the 30s to say get another key defender like a Charlie Dean or a Lecalier, or even a Noah Pecoraro from WA. So there are a few mature options that they could be looking at, but they're a club that I would think would try to move up. I mean, Richmond with their picks in the 20s, they may want to move up even a little bit more for another player. And in terms of the late first round, I mean, Brisbane, if they really rate a player, they could really push for a St Kilda pick or West Coast or Bombers. I know the Bombers, they've wanted to trade their future second round for another top 30 pick, but if they can get their hands on any of those later first round picks, they may even try that as well.
Yeah, it really depends on which players are available as well. So, obviously it could change. If Hobbs is available sort of past pick 10, then there's going to be a few clubs snapping or trying to snap him up. So, it'd be interesting to see Pete and Grace, who sort of slips through.
Thanks, guys, for that. We've just got a couple of questions from our followers.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously this is related to the Phantom Draft, I would say, and it sounds like it's going to come from a Brisbane fan. So which would you rather, guys, out of Josh Sin and a couple of late picks, or would you rather Darcy Wilmot, Campbell Chesser, and one late pick? Which one would you rather if you were, say, Brisbane in this example?
Yeah, I'm taking the 2 first round options, to be honest, because I think you get some similar value with a Chesser or a Wilmot to Sin. I think there's not much sort of separating those 3 players, so I take them and just the one late pick. But do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I could certainly see the reasoning why Brisbane would want to do that. I mean, they are a team that they're expecting to play. Their top 4 team played finals. If they can identify a player that they rate close to a top 5 pick per se, they just want to get the most elite talent through the door. I mean, it's already hard to fight for their spots, so they feel, what's the point in grabbing 2 guys that we don't think are quite as good, and one of them may not even want to stick around if they're not getting games. How about we take a player that we can fit into round 1 in an area of need and be happy with that? I mean, they've got Will Ashcroft next year, who's going to be an absolute star in their midfield. Maybe they look up for another tall. Maybe it's a Gibcus that they go, all right, we can nail this guy down. That's our key position player. We've got our gun midfielder next year, and they might be happy with that. But, I mean, on a personal note, I think there's a lot of quality in that late first round, so I'd be keeping those picks.
Yeah. Same with you, Declan?
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue with that. And, with the closeness of that range for many people, I think it's hard to give up 2 shots at that just for one.
Yep.
Alrighty, and we just got a second question.
Absolutely. So this is from an Adelaide perspective. They're asking whether Wanganeen Malira is able to fit those Crows' needs, or do the Crows really need him now that they've got Jordan Dawson in the door?
Yeah, I think he's one that Ed and I would maybe even look at with pick 6. So it'll be interesting to see whether he sort of is in that range for them. But most people are saying they're going with Rochelle anyway. So he might be even one, Ed, do you think that they trade down for if they think they can get him around the sort of pick 10 mark?
Well, personally, I have him as a prospect higher than Rochelle, so of course I would probably do that in my case. But I mean, it just would be really good to have he and, say, a Lockie Scholl in the next few years as well, going through those wings as 2 really hard-running and classy players. I mean, Seedsman, you do have on the wings who's doing really well, but he'll be getting into his peak of his career. I mean, Wanganeen Malira, you're banking for the next 10 years. But honestly, like, Rochelle is probably a really good fit for them as a forward. But I mean, Wanganeen Malira, I mean, he's one of the most talented players in the pool, so I mean, you couldn't complain about getting him despite what you have on your list.
Yeah, and Declan, do you tend to agree with that? Do you think he fits Adelaide's needs, or would you rather that small forward as it is?
I think he absolutely fits Adelaide's needs, and you can never have too many good kicks in one team. So I don't know if Jordan Dawson's inclusion would actually affect it that much. I think if they rate him about that range, then go for it. There's no reason not to.
Absolutely. So that pretty much wraps up our questions for now, but we're going to be back at the end of the top 10 just to get some of the draft experts' reactions on how it went down. Did it go the way we planned, or perhaps were there a few surprises? So thanks very much to those guys for chipping in, and we'll hear from them soon. And Grace, thanks again for coming in and hosting.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back too, of course, at the end of the first round. Make sure you've got your draft guide, which you can download from the website at central.rookieme.com.au/AFL. And be checking out all our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And we'll have plenty of content, including every pick, live on Twitter. Thanks very much. We'll catch you again soon.